Between Capcom finally showing off Street Fighter 6 and the upcoming release of Capcom Fighting Collection, it's starting to feel like Ryu, Chun Li, and the rest of the World Warriors are everywhere. To help celebrate Street Fighter's 35th anniversary, I wanted to take a look back at what Electronic Gaming Monthly's review crew said about the sequels, spin-offs, remakes, compilations, and more. Now, in case you're wondering, EGM managed to review 45 games in the Street Fighter orbit between 1989 and 2009. That includes all of the Street Fighter 2 variations, a bunch of the Street Fighter 3 ports, and most of the oddity releases. I'm talking Pocket Fighter and Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. For this list, I decided to not include games that simply had Street Fighter cameos like Cannon Spike, or games like Final Fight and Rival Schools that had characters turn up in the Street Fighter series. I have, however, opted to include the SNK vs. Capcom titles, as well as all of the spin-offs. What we're gonna do is count down the best and worst Street Fighter games using Electronic Gaming Monthly's own words and scores. There's no editorializing here, we're just gonna focus on what the critics said back in the day when these games first came out. Come, join me for this fireball throwing episode of EGM Ranks Street Fighter.
It's the most lethal G.I. Joe team yet! Capcom Street Fighter 2!
No way!
Wait! There's Guile, Ryu, Zangief, Blanca, and Dalsin!
What's a Dalsin? Oh!
Some with real ninja moves!
Hey!
But Troopers get Street Fighters too!
Vega, Sagat, Balrog!
And me, El Bison!
They look unbeatable! Ah!
You know them, you love them!
So correcto!
Capcom Street Fighter 2 figures each sold separately!
Oh, I like them!
Alright, starting off the list at number 45, it's X-Men vs. Street Fighter on the PlayStation. I'm an old school Street Fighter purist, you all know that. These 30-hit super combos, aerial raves, super jumps, and screen-clearing special moves are a real turn-off sometimes. I can tolerate the arcade X-Men vs. Street Fighter. The PlayStation one, I can't. It's slow and has terrible animation. Worse, the best feature of the original, team play, is out. This game shouldn't be on the PlayStation. You should modify your Saturn and import the Japanese version. Number 44, Capcom Fighting Evolution on the PlayStation 2. Old school, jaggy-ass art, blurry 2D backgrounds chock full of meaningless cameo appearances by castaway Capcom characters, mundane, unbalanced gameplay, yeah. A painfully small selection of characters only adds another reason to avoid Capcom's latest and far from greatest 2D fighter. Capcom vs. SNK did the multiple character fighting thing way better than this, and Guilty Gear looks way better on every level. Number 43, SVC Chaos, SNK vs. Capcom on the Xbox. This game might have flown in, say, 1993 against competition like Power Instinct and the original Fatal Fury. But when online Guilty Gear costs all of $20, forget it! Chaos suffers from imbalanced fighters, hit detection issues, and other basic gameplay screw-ups. While some character art looks a solid decade behind the curve. SNK should bow its collective head and beg for fan forgiveness. Number 42, Street Fighter Alpha 2 on the Super Nintendo. Let's face it, there are just certain games that shouldn't be made on 16-bitters. Sure, they tried really hard and came relatively close, but overall, Street Fighter Alpha 2 on the Super Nintendo is more of a chore than anything else. The graphics were good, but the poor control pretty much negated that. Speaking of poor control, I think back to Super Street Fighter 2 and remember how well that played compared to this one. Oh well, maybe next time. Number 41, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Xbox. It may be a little dated, but I still can't hate. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 showed me a lot of good times back in the day, and I have to say, I had fun playing it again on the Xbox. Granted, I'm pretty sure 90% of anyone who wants to play it already has it on another console. But this game wrote the book on spastic 2D fighting and is yet to be topped in that regard. The lack of online option is pretty weak, but frankly, would it have even worked? It's so fast! Number 40, Street Fighter EX3 on the PlayStation 2. Street Fighter EX3 was nasty when it first came out in Japan. It could have been called Slowdown Fighter EX3. But to Capcom's credit, they made Akira scrub the slowness right out of there. Now what you have is a shiny new Street Fighter with all kinds of flashy bells and whistles that don't amount to a hill of beans. It's frustrating that Capcom just churns out another gratuitously 3D Street Fighter game and doesn't take advantage of that third dimension. With games like Tekken Tag and Dead or Alive 2 around, this one is for die-hard fans only. Number 39, Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes on the PlayStation. Look, you know what we're gonna say. It's the same thing we've said for the previous two Versus games. Not being able to tag your partner in non-crossover mode play is disappointing. Period. It's even more annoying here because you can't have a partner and a third special hero in the normal game. On the plus side, the animation is impressive for a PlayStation sprite-based fighter. Super cancels, as always, are a cool feature, but we would have preferred if we had the option so you can turn them on or off. If you can't get the Dreamcast version, this isn't a bad alternative. Number 38, Street Fighter, the movie, on the Saturn. I don't like this game for two reasons. The control is poor, particularly when charge moves are concerned, and the 2-frame animation needs to go. Other than that, it's a digitized Street Fighter. No, it's not a translation of the arcade game in the same name. No juggling combos or anything like that. The full motion video is really clear, and the story mode is a really cool idea that should be used more often. If not for the control, a major point, Street Fighter the movie would have rated higher. Number 37, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival on the Game Boy Advance. This is the first fighter I have ever truly felt comfortable playing on a portable. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival is far from perfect, but still an awesome game to play against a friend. Hardcore Street Fighter fans will be instantly annoyed having to use the light tap of the button to accommodate 2 of the 6 striking moves. It's just too hard to pull off reliably. A couple mild graphical ticks popped up here and there, so a rental may be in order if that's a concern for you. Number 36, Super Street Fighter 2 on the Genesis. Another year, another Street Fighter. Yeah, I've heard this song before. Hopefully, it'll be the last time. The 4 new characters are a great addition, but are they enough reason to go buy the game? Yes, there are new moves for the other fighters, but there aren't enough to make any real difference. Although the graphics are a good match to the arcade, the sound really takes a dive. It's better to turn down the volume. Number 35, Street Fighter EX2 Plus on the PlayStation. It's Street Fighter in 3D again, which could be considered a good thing if you love Street Fighter and don't ever want it to change, or a bad thing if you like Street Fighter but want to see it change, depending on your preference. If you merely liked EX, then it would be best to pass on this and wait for EX3 on the PlayStation 2. If you didn't like the first EX at all, then this sequel isn't gonna change your mind. Number 34, Super Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. I'm getting a little tired of having to buy a new Street Fighter game every year. Sure, this game has 4 new characters and a nifty tournament mode, but why get this when you can wait a year for the next one? Super Street Fighter 2 plays the same as before, but the voices are horrible and the graphics need a few touch-ups. Capcom needs to totally redo this game to get any interest back. It's just more of the same. Number 33, Street Fighter 2 Alpha 3 on the Game Boy Advance. It's seriously time to release some proprietary hardware for these portable Street Fighter games. Here, I've got my favorite Street Fighter title of all time with new characters, impressive graphics and animation for a handheld, and all three isms faithfully reproduced. But also, a control scheme that makes me wish I'd never been cursed with human digits. I actually taped my hand to the Game Boy Advance at one point, leaving my fingers slightly freer to enter the necessary access code to call up a medium punch. Anyone expecting to reliably pull off a 20-hitter from Adon, forget about it. Number 32, Street Fighter II on the Game Boy. The first thing that came to mind was, why is this coming out now? The gameplay in Street Fighter II was surprisingly great. I could actually pull off combos as if I was playing the arcade version. The game's speed was lethargically slow, and the collision was not at all accurate. I found myself throwing fireballs and hitting the opponent at the peak of their jump. Basically, it's a good fighting game on the Game Boy, but I still have to wonder, why did it take so long? Number 31, Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max on the PlayStation Portable. Street Fighter Alpha 3 is an excellent reminder of why 2D fighters are still just as relevant today as they were a decade ago. Unfortunately, you probably won't be able to experience any of that brilliance on your PSP. At least, not in the way it was intended. As anyone who's played Darkstalkers on the handheld can attest to, the PSP's stock D-pad simply isn't up for the task of a 2D fighting game with all its traditional fireball and dragon punch motion. It's a more frantic and less balanced affair than you might expect from the series, but it's the best fighter on the PSP by a mile.
Shoryuken!
アーケードゲーム最新作スーパースト 2X Capcom.
We're back with number 30, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo on the Saturn. Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo just screams for attention, whether it's cute character animations or vibrant colored gems. This is to distract you from the fact that it's an average puzzle game. The whole game is a race to build the biggest gem, then break it and drop the screen full of counter gems on your opponent. This death blow is near impossible to counter. Yeah. Also, the characters are horribly unbalanced for some strange reason. Number 29, Pocket Fighter on the PlayStation. Pocket Fighter isn't exactly the most in-depth fighter that Capcom's ever made, but it really does have a lot more than just cutesy graphics and hilarious animations. The gameplay is fast-paced and fun, and the guard crushes and special combos add a lot to the game's appeal. The Edit Fighter mode does nothing for me at all, but it doesn't take anything away from the game either, so what the heck? Capcom fans will eat this one up. Number 28, Street Fighter 2010, The Final Fight on the Nintendo Entertainment System. This game is for skilled players because of the complexity of the moves. Capcom's designers have created their answer to Ninja Gaiden, complete with intermissions. Street Fighter 2010 contains all the familiar elements of a good action game, but the techniques that are used are overly complicated and detract from the game. Number 27, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter on the PlayStation. While I wasn't crazy about the versus fighting thing, Capcom is starting to nail 2D fighters on the PlayStation, and the action is almost perfect. Big characters like the Hulk and Blackheart don't play as well as the smaller guys, but it's acceptable. The crossover mode finally allows true versus action, just like the arcade. The ending collection and hidden artwork are nice incentives for beating the game repeatedly. Number 26, Street Fighter III Third Strike on the Dreamcast. The appeal behind Street Fighter III Third Strike can be summed up in two words: Chun Li. Yes, it's cheap the way that Capcom released this title separate from the last Street Fighter III package. But, on the other hand, Third Strike is so much more than just a series of small upgrades, like the ones that differentiated Second Impact from the original game. I've spent too much time with Marvel vs. Capcom 2 lately, though, so Street Fighter 3 feels a bit slow and deliberate for my tastes. But it's still damn beautiful to look at. Number 25, Street Fighter Collection 2 on the PlayStation. I've stated before that I think the two Street Fighter collections could have been arranged a little better. Regardless, this is one excellent compilation. Hyper Fighting is one of the best Street Fighters ever, if not the best, and the original, which is still fantastic in its own right, is included. These are games that everybody should have in their libraries. They're just as much a piece of video game history as Pac-Man or Pong. Number 24, Marvel vs. Capcom on the Dreamcast. Sure, Capcom's fighting games looked great on the PlayStation and Saturn. Marvel vs. Capcom on the Dreamcast isn't just great looking, but arcade perfect! Richly animated characters and stages enhance the tried and true Capcom fighting engine. You could get lost at the extremely fast pace that some of the 2-player matches will go at, and 4-player cross battles are even more fun. Hopefully, this one won't get lost in the Dreamcast launch shuffle. Number 23, SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters Clash on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. It may rip off ideas left and right from Magic the Gathering and especially Pokemon, but Card Fighters Clash still comes across as a novel experience. Although it's not as addicting or cutesy, thank God, or easy to get into as Pokemon, this thing packs some deep gameplay that'll keep you glued to your handheld for weeks. The card game's rules are simple, and the real strategy comes from organizing your deck and wielding your special cards. Number 22, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the 3DO. Don't be skeptical. This is definitely a great rendition of the latest Street Fighter game. The current 3DO controller makes it harder to play, but if you use the Super Nintendo adapter, it plays great. The graphics and sound are excellent reproductions of the arcade, and it even goes as far as to include Akuma. If you haven't already gotten your fill of Street Fighter and need the newest version, this is easily just as good as any console rendition. Number 21, Capcom vs. SNK 2 EO on the Xbox. First off, forget about the easy operation crap. Using the analog stick to execute special moves is a crutch that should be reserved for Special Olympics participants. Luckily, you can exclude the EO players from online matches you host. And that is a good thing, since playing on the Xbox Live is the real draw here. Yeah, it's the same over-the-top brawl fest that PlayStation 2, GameCube, and even Dreamcast fans have been playing for a while now. But delivering dragon punches to friends, enemies, and strangers is vicious fun. Number 20, Street Fighter III Double Impact on the Dreamcast. I know a lot of people didn't like Street Fighter III in the arcade, but I could never quite figure out why. Some lame characters, yes, but overall, this is a damn solid 2D fighter. The gameplay is familiar and comfortable, but with the graphics and a couple of new features that make it interesting. And a nod to Capcom for packaging both games in one. Honestly, though, they're too similar to warrant purchase separately. Normally, I'd say buy, but with Third Strike coming out soon, you might want to just rent. Number 19, Capcom vs. SNK 2 Mark of the Millennium 2001 on the PlayStation 2. Capcom vs. SNK 2 is an improvement on one of the better 2D fighters in recent times, but it's still not balanced enough to be taken seriously. They've tweaked the overall roster, but there are still too many characters with whack-ass priorities pulling off too many devastating combos. Plus, the sharp 3D graphics make those old 2D characters look that much worse. If you recognize Capcom vs. SNK 2 for what it is, a fun, nostalgic 2D free-for-all, you'll dig the action and maybe all the inside jokes too. Number 18, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition on the Genesis. It's about time that Street Fighter II came out for the Genesis. All the problems that seem to have plagued the first version of Street Fighter II Champion Edition were hammered out. You know, like the black bars and such. Now, this version looks and plays like the Super Nintendo version, minus a few colors. The group battle mode is a neat touch, but it doesn't really save it from an 8. Though the graphics are there, the soundtrack and voices are horrible. It really is that bad. Number 17, Street Fighter Collection on the PlayStation. I could find very little wrong with this awesome compilation, except in Capcom's choice of games. I think that Hyper Fighting should have taken the place of Super Street Fighter 2. If you already have Street Fighter Alpha 2, I would find it hard to recommend this package to you. Very little new is added, and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo alone is not worth the bucks. But if you don't own a Street Fighter game yet, then this is an absolute must-buy. See why Street Fighter is the best fighting game series around. Number 16, Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha on the PlayStation. I still think that Street Fighter 3 should have gone this route, but with better polygon counts, shading, and texture mapping. For a new Street Fighter game, Street Fighter EX Plus does more for 3D fighting games than any other title. For one thing, it retains nearly all the combos you've used in the 2D series. The game plays very solidly, and I feel right at home. Everything runs at a very high frame rate, just like in the arcades. Overall, it's a great translation. And we're back with number 15, Street Fighter Anniversary Collection on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. The underrated Street Fighter 3 came out past the series' prime and on dying platforms, which means relatively few people got to experience its greatness. But is it worth getting today? I suspect most people have moved on to flashier titles or the third dimension, but old schoolers will appreciate this fantastic compilation. Street Fighter 3 alone is worth owning, and you get all the Street Fighter 2 variants to boot. Why is Capcom always chintzy with these collections, though? Where's Street Fighter Alpha 3 or EX2? Number 14, Capcom vs. SNK on the Dreamcast. I love Capcom. That said, I also love SNK, so this game was a dream come true. And aside from a few small nicks, I couldn't be happier. Say what you will about 2D being dead, as long as companies like Capcom can keep pumping out titles that look this good, hand-drawn games will never fully go away. My only real problem is the gameplay feels a little slow for my taste. I still have Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on my brain. But aside from that, it's excellent. Number 13, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 on the Game Boy Advance. Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo may be old, but it's still one of the best puzzle games ever made. Thankfully, this handheld incarnation delivers a stunningly accurate port. All the combo-forming, gem-smashing gameplay is here, along with all the unlockable secrets. It even supports the Game Boy Advance link cable. Too cool! The only thing I could find wrong occurred during the large combos when some slight slowdowns and sound drops reared their glitchy heads. Number 12, Street Fighter Collection on the Saturn. Let's face it, if you're a fan of Street Fighter like I am, you owe it to yourself to get Street Fighter Collection. Personally, I'd rather have had Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition and Street Fighter 2 Turbo than both Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, but still, I'm not gonna complain. Both games are excellent ports, and the new Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold is an awesome update for Alpha 2 fans. Not only are there a ton of classic characters hidden within, but cameos too! Number 11, SNK vs. Capcom Match of the Millennium on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Hey, I'm as ready as the next guy to summarily dismiss handheld fighting games. But to say that SNK vs. Capcom really surprised and impressed me is an understatement. Not only does the game go beyond your expectation of what should be packed into a cart, it plays well too. Try this card out, it's much better than you'd ever expect. Number 10, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Dreamcast. Although I've never been a big fan of the series for some very basic reasons that don't change with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I must say that this is by far my favorite of Capcom's Versus games. The new control scheme works great, especially for the more casual fans like myself, and the graphics, animation, and characters are top-notch. If you like your fighting Fast and Furious with big number combos and screen fill-in mayhem, look no further. Number 9, Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the PlayStation. Capcom saved the best for last? Street Fighter Alpha is probably the best Street Fighter game to come along in a long time. And as far as PlayStation incarnations go, it's definitely the one to go with. As far as the gameplay, well, it's the old faithful, isn't it? It's always worked. If I have any problem, it's with the damn load times, which really slows the pace down. Number 8, Street Fighter Champion Edition on the PC Engine. I really didn't know what to expect from the PC Engine version, but I've gotta tell you that this game is incredible. Every aspect, from the perfect gameplay, excellent voices, and colorful graphics, make Street Fighter II Champion Edition a winner. The added cost of the 6-button controller seems negligible because the game is just so good. Seems the PC Engine is back from the dead. Number 7, Street Fighter II Turbo Champion Edition in the arcade. With its enhanced gameplay, new moves, and improved animation, Capcom Street Fighter II Turbo Champion Edition is tops in our book. The best thing about this game, though, is the simple fact that many new strategies must now be learned and used because of the new goodies thrown in by Capcom. All this aside, Street Fighter II Turbo Champion Edition is a great game. So, why not a 10? Well, since Turbo is just an upgrade and not a brand new game, we couldn't see giving it a 10, although we'd like to. Number 6, Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the Dreamcast. Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the Dreamcast has been long overdue. It looks like we're never going to experience the Dream Passport modes that were in the Japanese version, because Capcom has decided to remove internet support from the US release. However, Capcom's late release has suddenly renewed our love in Street Fighter Alpha 3. Know this, the Dreamcast version has perfect animation, super quick load times, and all the modes from the PlayStation version. Number 5, Street Fighter Alpha on the PlayStation. I'm really surprised that this game translated so well on the home systems. The graphics look near identical to the coin-op version, though the warriors seem a bit smaller. The refined gameplay of Street Fighter reminded me of the good old days. Sure, Alpha might only be a 2D fighting game, but it has enough solid gameplay to keep my interest over a long period of time. Now, if only something could be done about those load times. Nonetheless, this translation is hot. Number 4, Street Fighter Alpha 2 on the Saturn. I suppose I should be pretty angry with Capcom for its habitual rehashing of Street Fighter 2. But darn it, Capcom puts out some kick-butt rehash. Street Fighter Alpha 2 is the best 2D fighting game you can get for a console. Scratch that. It's my favorite fighting game, period. Sorry, Tekken 2. This is the perfect port of the coin-op with all the backgrounds, perfect control, and a new custom combo system intact. The load time's still a pain, though. Number 3, Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. Games just don't get any better. Never since Pac-Man has there been an arcade game that has been this popular. The home version is just as good. The moves are perfect, the graphics outstanding, and the audio exceptional. Get one of the new 6-button sticks and you'll swear you're playing the arcade version. Number 2, Street Fighter II Turbo on the Super Nintendo. I didn't think the first Street Fighter 2 could be topped, but what a surprise this one is! The first improvement is the incredible speed and new attacks that can be accomplished. Don't think that the combos from the old one will work because the computer isn't stupid anymore. The best fighting game just got better. And finally, number 1, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Some games stand the test of time. Street Fighter 2 drags time into the back alley and beats it senseless. 14 years on, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the pinnacle of the Street Fighter 2 series and fighting games period, still gets serious play among genre geeks. It's a long time to dismantle a game and analyze its merits and flaws the way that only a community of frame-counting fanatics can. HD Remix is the product of nearly a decade and a half of long dissection, and Street Fighter is still the world champion of fighting games. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of EGM Ranks Street Fighter. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we have a whole playlist full of countdowns like this. We've covered the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Virtua Fighter, Mega Man, Contra, Sonic the Hedgehog, and so much more. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite Street Fighter game? And yes, it can be one of the spin-offs, but not Cannon Spike. We're not counting cameos. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with more reviews and, who knows, maybe a Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew episode. Or maybe not. You'll just have to tune in and find out, I guess. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.